Alright, hello everybody over there in the Facebook Live. We are today with Maya Gonzalez right here, and we're going to interview her. She's one of my favorite authors and illustrators. I personally love her book, My Diary from Here to There. It really represents me a lot. And Maya is an author, illustrator, educator, and activist who lives in San Francisco, and she has illustrated over 20 award-winning books. And also, in 2013, she helped co-create an online learning environment called School of the Free Mind. So let's welcome Maya Gonzalez to our December interview.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's really good to be here. I'll try to be loud. It seems so intimate. It's just you and I, but we always project out into the world.
Yeah. So let's get started.
Fabulous.
So what inspired you to become a writer, and when did you start writing?
Writing. Well, so as a small child, I used art a great deal. And for some bizarre reason, when I was 13, I decided I had to stop making art entirely and focus on writing. I read Emily Dickinson, and I just was so inspired by how she crafted words and what she could communicate. And so I started focusing on writing at a very young age. But when I got into college, my writing was so reflective of myself, it became too much. And so I actually turned toward painting. And I still had that desire and that need to express. And so I started coding my stories into my imagery. And it was my way to continue the storytelling, but from what at that time felt like a safer, nonverbal place. So that's why I think when I started creating children's books, I really understood the kids who didn't have voice, because I had been that kid and then I had been that grown up again. And so I understood the power of also the image. And then eventually I got back to storytelling. And ironically then I had been making children's books, and so the natural storytelling was to children. So it became sort of this healing journey of my own.
Oh, that's really interesting. And now we're going to ask you a question that one of our authors asked in one of our polls. Santo Nagara, he's the author of a book, and I for Activist, and he sent a question. He was curious about children's book with the theme of bullying in relation to gender. How is talking about this kind of bullying with kids helpful?
So this was really interesting, and of course, thank you. This is, a lot of my work is rooted in my own, obviously my work is very deep. I come at as an artist and as someone who uses my art as a place to heal. And so I see my work as very when I share it out, I'm taking that healing and extending it outward. So a lot of what I've negotiated in my personal life then is being disowned by my family when they found out I was queer, dealing with racism, sexism, and all these multiple layers, right, within our society. And so using art as a way to deal with that, it's like the perfect place, right? The nonverbal, really expansive, you can communicate in all these different ways.
And it's very deep.
Right?
Too.
And everyone can go to that place. And so I started dismantling a lot of, obviously, racism and sexism, and then using the same place to negotiate cis-sexism, right? All the homophobia and transphobia that exists. So when I started telling stories to kids to make them stronger, right, and give them more context to understanding, I started with racism. So I did a ton of anti-racism work for 20 years with my children's books and reflection and finding voice. But what I found was missing from the equation, that it just wasn't time yet to talk that much about, was around gender. Yeah. So when we think of doing anti-racist work, we think of doing anti-sexist work, right? We're all really on board. But when we conjured sort of that imaginal, sort of symbolic image of this white male, that's part of the patriarchy and part of the oppressive systems we're dealing with, we fail to recognize most of the time that that's a cis, straight white male. And so if we want to really resolve Western colonization and a lot of the oppressions that are going on, we really need to also center queer, trans, intersex people within that frame, so that we're really taking apart the systems that oppress all of us. So a lot of my work does focus on opening up conversations around why certain communities are bullied, and when a bully is present, I don't talk about 45 in the least. It's really about the systems that have kept certain communities oppressed and why we have so much silence in our communities and lack of reflection in children's books, right? So we can see, I was getting all this stuff in my Facebook feed of these educators that were like having kids that were really freaking out. Because it was really traumatic, the lies and the propaganda being told about our communities. And so I was like, I don't want those kids to internalize that. So we immediately created a story that talked about the context so that when we understand why our communities are targeted and how that's being used still within power systems, which I know is really intense stuff to talk with kids about. But it was so important to me that they not internalize those bad messages.
And it's also important for them to see like the reality of the situation too, and not just what adults are telling them. And in books, it's easier for them to understand because they're seeing images that are easier than just big words that they just listen that they really don't understand.
So that's exactly right. So I use imagery and that symbology and that way of storytelling from that more healed, nonverbal place of my own. Right, to be like, oh, I know what it's like to deal with bullies. I know what it's like to be oppressed, and this is how I can conjure that symbolically for kids. So it's really about empowering and really helping keeping our kids awake because they're feeling it, they know it, right? So I think that that's why it's good. That's why it's all connected.
Okay. And one of your most recent books is They, She, He, Me, Free to Be that we have over here. And this book is about the pronouns we use. And what inspired you to write this book?
Well, the first gender book I wrote, ironically, it was like 8 years ago. It was in 2010, and it was a gender now coloring book, an activity book. I have two. And it was a way to start talking to my then 4 or 5-year-old named Zai about gender in ways that were, again, context, nature-based, holistic, and kid-friendly, right? As well as empowering grown-ups to be able to feel really confident in how they talked about it. So we now have a 5-year-old, and a year ago on the playground, it was like the gender bullying just like ramped way up. The policing, oh, you're not this, oh, you have to do that. If you're this, then you have to be like that. So Matthew actually was reading Gender Now and working with Sky around it and started using these pronouns as a way to talk to her about it. So we're like, oh, we need to be able to use this in a more solid way. So the book just kind of became immediately. And we wanted something that was really accessible to kids because how do you start? I mean, they get it. They totally get it. But how do you find ways to talk to kids that are relevant, that are easy, that a lot of educators could access, that even parents could kind of expand into? And pronouns were really like the thing. And having they as this, it's not enough, but it's an awesome step toward expanding towards this idea away from the binary. Again, moving more toward a holistic, nature-based perspective for kids and away from this very Western, very colonized, binary boy-girl stuff. Because it is the root of the oppression. And so really, I feel if we kind of keep that inclusive, expansive, holistic frame that kids already hold when they're young, we can actually start shifting, I think, very large perspectives because their minds will stay more in community in a sense, and less that combative way.
Also, Innocento also sent another question, and it is, do you think having many books depicting this theme is harmful or feeds negative self-perceptions?
So this was interesting because I felt like the question, I was kind of playing with the question a little bit because I was like looking at it before. And on one hand, I feel like, well, let's just talk about the LGBTQ community, is like the vast majority of books are not written from within the community, so they're not first voice. And they almost entirely include narratives that are either bullying or you have to somehow be exceptional to be accepted. And so they're having so many of these narratives without a critique of them, I think is actually very damaging. I think what it does essentially is it's informing all the kids about who's going to get bullied, who to bully, that you will be bullied, right? And that you have to like perform exceptionally beyond everyone else to kind of get to an equitable standing. So I think having books that actually call that stuff out, and I think it's an uncomfortable time because we are, I think, acknowledging a lot of oppressive frames now. But I think those are fabulous. And I think also having books that don't buy into those Western frames, that actually try as much to step outside of them, I think are also really valuable. So we give kids sort of like, oh, well, this is what a healed perspective or another way of experiencing life, which happens, could occur. And so creating, those alternate narratives so that we can...
and sometimes it's also even hard for parents to really talk about it or how to explain it, but this type of books is really great because it gives them that extra hand that you can maybe use a book, or maybe the parents are they prefer the pronoun they and they don't know how to explain their kid, they're not called he, or they prefer or she, so it's a really great way to really play around with that.
Well, it's interesting because I don't think something we've called out a lot about this. So the first part is super simple, right? It's almost like a dance, the song. And then the next part is actually we're talking to kids and explaining it to them. And then the back part, we're actually languaging adults. Be like, this is how you can hold it. Because the more confident we are, right, that nonverbal, that's what we're going to pass on, is that deeper thing. Actually, I think this ends up tying into another question, so I won't say it.
We'll get there.
I know, I was like,
What would be your advice to parents about how to talk to their kids about gender, and what also will be your advice to teachers?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that there's... I think it's hard, but I think like with race, with sexism, with all of the racism, sexism, that by putting it within context and having those harder, larger, like connected conversations, and even when they're little, like poor Sky, I started when she was very young, but I wanted these words and this concept to be familiar to her as she started to understand more. So it wasn't like, oh, we're going to have this hard talk all of a sudden. Be like, no, this is the shape of things. This is how you look through, so you can see through what kids are even saying. And so I think having that bigger talk is really a lot better than having those little talks sometimes. Like, there's so little understanding at the moment around holding a nature-based holistic frame around gender that I would even just start with that. Like, well, let's just notice, like, oh, so they only have what they're calling boys and girls here. Oh, so so girls are supposed to look like this. So even coming into our own awareness about the stereotypes, the assumptions, these sort of like requirements, and the kind of policing that kids often feel pressure in these like millions of ways, like it's on every show.
Or even like book. Girls have to be just playing with Barbies. Or they just have to play just with cars. And as example for me, since little, I was fixing cars with my grandpa. So it is like, oh, that's not a girl thing. Right. Or like right now, I fix cars. I'm Ella swapping a car. And people is like, oh my God, why you do that? I'm like, because I'm a girl and I can do it.
Right? Exactly. Like that's what's so fascinating is we need to dismantle all of these layers because it will free everyone and to really bring forth whatever their power is.
And whatever they want to do and they want to be, that's their decision, not society's decision.
So I think understanding the stereotypes is actually
it's
really
a really big
powerful.
step. Also, what was the hardest part when you created a children book?
The hardest part, that's a good question. Okay, so I've made a lot of children's books. I've made I think we're pushing 40 or something, a really ton of, and I have 50 on the back burner, and I love it. I just think it's the coolest thing. It's like a big project, and you get to, I try to do as many fun things and enjoy myself as much as possible, because I think you can feel that. But I got super sick in the middle of one book, and I had to stop the book for a few years. And so that was hard to feel the book inside of me and not have the actual energy to actually get it out of me.
Okay, what is your favorite part about creating books?
Oh, my favorite part. That's a good question too. I don't know that I've been asked either of those. There's something delicious about the process to me, where it's just like, oh, I'm gonna include this and I'm gonna add this in, and when you're in the mix, I'm constantly, because I hold a very strong spiritual perspective when I'm creating, I'm very much like in conversation with the people who will be reading it. So kids and grown-ups and parents and bedtime and classrooms, right? And the park, like all those things are like in my heart. So as I'm like painting something, I'll be like, oh, I want the park, I want the feeling of the park here, so that that kid will like drop in here, or I want this like moment with the parent. And so it feels very conversational in a way. So so I think that's my favorite part, is I feel really engaged.
That's really good. Also, you have illustrated some of your own books. What is the process of illustrating a book like?
Well, I try to keep myself charmed whenever I play, because I want it to be playful, right? So I think that, wait, what was the question?
When you illustrate the books, what is the process of illustrating a book like?
Excuse me. So it actually begins a long time prior to beginning it, right? Where it's almost like I start dreaming about it. So I allow things to conjure for a very long time. And then I sort of go through a gathering phase. And then it's interesting, I notice it's almost like a ritual. So it begins with this sort of outside, deeper spiritual, and then it's like I drop into like embodying that. And like I was saying, like being in conversation with people that the book is for.
Yeah.
So that is this time where I set up a space where I then create a lot of art, which is one of my favorite parts also, because there's something about just like creating that I still very much enjoy. And I can't see, I think this is part of another question too. All my stories wind into one another. Is I can't separate the storytelling from the art making. Yeah. And then also now I publish my own book, so all of the designing, it's like I'm the queen of everything. Yeah. I'm just like, oh, I want it to be exactly like this. Yeah. And so that is very interesting to lay out, and it takes a lot of layers of thinking and being. And so I'm one of those people that has a desk that you kind of can't see. It's just like, I know it's here somewhere. But somehow it all kind of is talking to each other at the same time. So then I also am I have to be one of those people that keeps track of a lot of things. So that's also a big part of it, is sort of making sure all of the pieces are moving kind of around at the same time, so we land in the same place at the end.
Yeah, so following to the question is like, when you start a book, do you start the illustrations or the story?
So usually I start with a prayer, right? Almost like a title, almost like this concept where it moves around, and then it will start moving through me. And so sometimes I'll get, that's that thing. It's just like they all have so much is nonverbal, right? Like I really honed the nonverbal, so that when I do get to the writing part, or the actual laying the story down, it has that deeper feel to it. So I would say the imagery, some kind of spirit of the book comes first. And then I go back and forth sometimes. And when I mentor people, I'll be like, okay, now you should take it into art. And that usually freaks people out completely. Yeah. They're just like, what? No, not yet. Yeah. I'll be like, no, because then the art talks to you. Yeah. And then it kind of holds the story, like, oh, it needs to be telling me this when I see this image. Yeah. So then I think they go back and forth. Okay. But at some point, then you gotta nail the art, right? You'd be like, okay, that's enough playing. Okay.
And what do you think is the value of storytelling with young children?
I personally think that children's books are one of the most radical things we can do for ourselves and for kids. If all of us at this time, in this place, in this zone, have been damaged by the children's books, either at home or at school or the library, unfortunately, that we came into contact with. Yeah. Either telling us we weren't supposed to be mechanics, right? We're not supposed to be queer, or femme, or whatever, right? And so I think by creating children's books that are relevant to our own lives, we heal something within ourselves. And by extending those kind of stories out to kids, instead of what's going to sell, right? Instead of what's the current fad, or the latest like gift book or something. But these other books, then we take back the power of storytelling, right, to generations. This isn't just going to affect our kids, it will affect them being parents and grandparents. And so I really have this, what I call the long dance, right? Where we have to pay attention to these deeper places if we want to create real change. Because, ultimately, I want to change the world.
Yeah.
And so this is the trick. This is the judge. Like, go in this direction. I always encourage folks.
Books are your secret weapon.
Exactly. Power. My secret power.
What makes a story engaging and powerful?
I don't think every story will be powerful to every child. I think there are some that get a lot of play with a lot of kids. And I think the more we open up to the power of storytelling, the more access kids will have to power within stories. But I think for myself, if we can speak to those places within ourselves, what I found is there are kids that are just like us. And when I first started going into the classroom, would walk in and just be like floored. I'd be like, oh my God, these kids are me. Like, they're still exactly what I was dealing with. Yeah. So I felt the power of my stories. I was like, oh, my stories aren't vacuous, just like my own, ponderings. These actually are part of a deeper, larger experience that I can share out. So I think that those are the ones that are really cool.
Yeah. Okay, what advice would you give to children who want to grow up to be authors?
Well, I personally think, especially for Latinx community and African American community at this time, based on the statistics, that we need to start making children's books now. So, just so everyone knows, I have a free online program for kids and anyone else who wants to play. It's got over 2 hours of free video with me, a downloadable project, this whole packet, blah, blah, blah. It's called WriteNowMakeBooks.com. So it's WRITE, WriteNowMakeBooks.com, or if you can look me up and find it. And it's a way to like teach kids about making books now. Like, don't wait. Like, yes, read all the books you love, do that, but start now. Like, get that experience, understanding the shape of the form, like how you like create the whole package, right? The kind of power you can get out with them, and sharing them, and even like encouraging other people to do it. Is don't wait. That's my advice.
Okay.
Do it now.
Do it now.
Right now, make books. Right now, make books.
And at Tandem, we love books, as you can see, and we love a lot of different titles. But what is your favorite children's book?
So I'm so glad I saw that question, because it's always so hard. I can become like a deer in the headlights, right? What? I have to choose one? But it's kind of funny. I chose this book that my kid has, and it's this little tiny board book, and it has this totally like kid that you can't tell what gender they are. They're just a kid, right? And it's Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star.
Oh.
And they go through this like nighttime experience where they take a ladder and they go up and they like get a piece of the star and they bring it home. And it's illustrated super simply, and we sing it, we read the book, we look at the pictures, and then we talk about it when we see the moon and the stars. And so it was the one that resonated for me this time. I think because it felt like my kid could see themselves in it. And we could turn it into a song, and we could take it out into nature. And you guys can
just have fun together and spend a good time.
Right?
Yeah. And
we don't have to like go through, because I'm that parent that's always like, well, this is all the kids in this book are white, or all the kids we only see boys and girls, and that's a lot. Like it was just like, where we could just be with it. And so that's my favorite book right now.
Oh, great. So thank you so much for answering all our questions, and thank you for coming to our interview. So everybody, please check out her website. It's amazing. And check out her books. Please go buy them. They're great Christmas gifts. I got them for my nephews.
Right,
thank you so much for being here, and bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, Odette.